Welcome to the ICA Plus Canadian Leaders series. I'm your host, Rachel CrowSpreadingWings. We have the next inspirational and fantastic conversation for you. Andy Krupski, ICA Vice-chair, shares knowledge, advice, and as always, some great laughs. Enjoy. You've been with the ICA for quite a while. Can you tell me about what your adventure has been with them and how it's changed in this last year?
Well, it wasn't last year. I mean, I've been part of the ICA in two different lives. One, I was on the board when I was running a couple of multinationals. I left the board at that point because I found the ICA in its original form was essentially a lobbying group to lobby government for government advertising. So originally it was for Canadian agencies, and then all the Canadian agencies got bought up by multinationals, and so they then wanted to lobby the governments to make sure that the multinationals still had access to government money. Some degree of education through the CAP course, but by and large, it was completely and utterly ineffective body. So I left and went on to do other things. And then I'm going to say now, 9 or 10 years ago, leading the Hive, which is an independent, I rejoined in an effort to, see if the independent voice could be heard at that level, and secondarily to make some, to have an impact on the industry, leave a bit of a legacy. It's really changed since we brought Scott on board. He has brought purpose and vision. We collectively decided to pivot to much more of a content hub with content germane to agencies who are dealing with COVID issues related to mental stress, keeping people, hiring people, leading businesses, etc. So through that process, we impacted so many parts of our industry, which is, and now it's really on fire, in my opinion, and really leading the Canadian association industry in terms of its value, both from the economy of the country, but also to the advertising industry.
As somebody who works with a lot of the C-suite and, you've known people, you've had relationships over the years globally, with the pandemic, and as leaders are trying to keep their businesses going and keep their employees motivated, what are some of the challenges that you've heard from these leaders about what they're facing trying to keep things moving forward?
The common challenges have been people. I mean, there's different challenges by different vertical, different industry, but the common challenges have been, how, and if you also exclude businesses that are in food distribution, QSR, those sorts of business. So beyond that, the common challenges have been really people, learning to deal with meeting like this, the isolation as a human being, how to communicate, how to present, how to keep people engaged and involved. And particularly in our industry, which is younger than most industries in terms of an age profile, we ran into, and we all ran into, the inevitable scenario where there's a young, talented person in a 900 square foot apartment who hasn't been able to get out of there for God knows what, except to go shopping. So all of that isolationism, and the implications to mental stress, and in the early days, we didn't know what kind of business we actually had until the government did kick in, and they did a great job, both sides of the border. So, I mean, I think on balance, it was really managing talent and showing, being empathetic and understanding to people's conditions.
And bringing up empathy, in a lot of the research that I've been doing in the last few months, I've seen a lot of talk about being more transparent and kind of how the industry is asking itself to reach in and remember its own humanity and get in touch with empathy and compassion. How do you think that has really changed over the last 3 years because of the pandemic?
Oh, I think it's hugely changed. I think, well, what COVID's done, I mean, I think that the upside of COVID, and there's been lots of downsides, but the upside of COVID is it has exposed all the inequities and cracks in society and just blew it apart, made it really clear to everybody, whether it's race or gender or economic disparity. It's much more visible than it ever was before. So there's no more debate about the issues. The issues are there. And companies and brands and people all have to be cognizant of that. So it's changed it immensely. And if you're not aware of it and you're not trying to deal with it, then you're not really going to live very long in terms of a business.
So what do you believe are the most important industry challenges your sector should focus on?
I mean, it starts with people, keeping training, motivating, culture and the cultural environment. And that includes diversity and inclusion and all the BIPOC issues, training. So it starts that at I mean, we're a people business. So if you don't get that, then, and then secondarily, building an environment where, they can be their full selves, they can take risks and make mistakes, all of which leads to thinking that's disruptive and innovative, which then drives our clients' businesses forward. So the core of everything is having people who believe strongly that they can try things, come up with ideas, and not be vilified for mistakes, but rewarded for trying. So it starts at the core is everything is around our people, 100%.
And when we're talking about the people and bringing in new talent and coming into this kind of a situation, what kind of advice would you give those newcomers to the business? Because they may not have that chance to be able to walk down the hall and talk to one of their coworkers and ask for advice or go to lunch with somebody like yourself in the same way that we could 3 years ago.
Yeah, I know. I think that's true, except that, going back to what I just said, if companies with leadership and management that understands the problem, makes it clear that they can ask anybody anything, anytime. So for example, we have bi-weekly, I'll talk to 5 or 6 employees a week like this.
Right.
And just how you doing? What questions do you have? Any issues you might have? What do you want to know from me? So we create that. I mean, until we're all back in whatever hybrid model we're going to be back in, they have to feel, it can't be felt as a bad thing to ask your boss's boss. It doesn't matter who. And so trying to break down the hierarchical barriers and make it, and so in some ways, Zoom and Team and all the other platforms help.
Right.
Because you can have a face-to-face conversation. It is private. And you can say, ask me what you want to ask me. So again, I think some of the technology that we now have that's kind of common now allows for much more senior management interaction with the employee base.
Do you think that too, it might also kind of help reduce any fear that somebody might have who is new to the industry or the company, because there kind of is that barrier of the computer, right? But also, as you said, there's that more of a sense of privacy.
Yeah, it does. I mean, when we get into scenarios, and we've had them where you've got a hybrid model, in other words, you've got 4 people at a meeting live and 4 people at home. And you have to be prepared to do that. The 4 people at home inevitably feel a little disconnected, no matter what you do, no matter how smart you are, no matter what the
Right.
agenda is, and no matter what, you know, you can eat breakout rooms, all those crazy ideas, well, crazy things, because you don't have that 5 minutes before the meeting with the boss and 5 minutes after, and you don't see the facial recognition, you know, somebody turns their camera off or whatever. So making sure that in a hybrid world, it isn't seen as a penalty for not being in the office.
Right.
It is a bit of a challenge right now. A lot of the consulting firms are trying to deal with that. We're trying to do the same, but we're not in a hybrid model at the moment. I think we will be in the next 6 to 8 weeks, but we're going in there with our eyes wide open with that in mind. Because some people say, look, I've got I got relatives that need grandparents at home, and I don't want to come into the office. Okay. And is that going to penalize me? And the answer has to be no.
So I wanted to know, are you still using the gratitude book? Because you had said our industry will only survive if it's populated by passionate learners. So right. I'm wondering if you can also kind of expand on that. You did touch on it a little bit, but this was one of the questions that I really wanted to ask you.
Not as much, which it's just that it's, you know, not as much self-discipline as I probably should have. But in part, my life's pretty good right now. So I should be writing it, fill it page after page, but I should be, because it's always good to pen it down. I mean, occasionally I still have it here. I have it on my desk, but I used to be a daily, and it's probably now a weekly thing. On the passionate learners thing, it's even more critical now than ever before, because there's so much more to learn, you know, and at pace. You know, I've spent a lot of time trying to read up on, you know, if you know, you go from crypto to NFTs, and now we're into the metaverse and the implications of what that may or may not be, and AI, and what does that mean for marketing and for brands and for people and culture? Because a large part of what we do has to recognize what's going on in culture and be reflective of culture, so you're germane. So if you're not someone that likes to spend time studying, reading, thinking about the business, the issues that are impacting the business, and they're you can go on forever, then you're probably not in the right business.
Right. Like you kind of, it's almost, you got to really be okay with living and breathing it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, and people will say, oh, you know, we're so busy now, and I'm working 14 hours a day, and when do I do it? And my response to that is, and I've seen that when in the early days of the pandemic, what I used to do is go and meet people who were isolated in a park somewhere or somewhere. So I got to travel all over Toronto and places I'd never been to before. But more importantly, they go, oh, I got so much stuff, so back common. I just can't shut down. I'm working. And I said, well, that's kind of interesting, but you somehow found an hour and a half to meet me. And so it's self-discipline and self-inflicted. I mean, we as a company said, you know, no, shut off your computer at 5 o'clock. Shut it off. It's okay.
Yeah.
But people, you know, oh my God, I'll feel, I get guilty, or somehow I'll be negatively reviewed if I'm not around 24/7. And so my view on that is you got to spend time to learn, because if you're not learning, then down the road someone else is, and you're not going to be as good as the next person who has already said, geez, I've already looked at the data and I'm thinking about this, and I saw this kind of campaign in the UK, and it really has implications the way we're thinking, and the banking business is deregulating, and what is the implication? Like, you got to be aware of that stuff, or you're just going to be left behind anyway.
What is considered authentic value when it comes to how advertisers approach inclusion and diversity?
I mean, you got to roll it back a little bit and say, okay, first of all, they have to be enlightened to begin with, right? It can't, we talk a lot about at the Hive about something called confirmation bias and how it gets in the way of people's thinking. So you come to every meeting and you come to every conversation with a degree of bias. And if you're not prepared to air your biases up front and you just keep them to yourselves, then you're going to approach every point of view with that. So
right.
The best example of a positive example of that is 2 years. I was telling somebody this the other day that you know the agency Wyden Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I was at a conference with Dan Wyden. I'm going to say 2, 3, 4 years ago, and he told this story. This is pre the Colin Kaepernick work on Nike. And he said, one day I was walking through my office like I always do in the morning, and I walked through the account group, and I walked through the creative place group, and I walked through the planning group. Then I sit in my office and do whatever I do. And he said, and this particular day, I thought something is really wrong. I don't know what it is, but I feel it's really wrong.
Uh-huh.
And then he came to the realization that all of the brands, or a majority of the brands that they were working on, were brands that were targeted to and sold to urban Black and Latino Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody that was working on those brands were white, well turned out San Francisco males. Mm-hmm. And he thought, oh shit. And he didn't say that in the speech, but I think that's what he meant. So he found a professor, I think out of Stanford, I could be wrong, who is well known for diversity and inclusion issues, but more around the notion of making people understand that people of visible minorities, and I really never understood the term visible minorities, I do now. The visible minorities come to a scenario where they are a minority and they're visible, but they know they innately believe that they're going to be judged by what they look like as opposed to what they say, so they don't bring their whole self to the conversation.
Right.
So this professor put together a complete curricula and went around the Wyden Kennedy offices all around the world and taught people about hiring, recruiting, training, evaluating, with a much broader canvas in terms of what we just discussed. Mm-hmm. And then he showed the work that that agency produced pre that change and the work after the change. And that's when the whole Colin Kaepernick stuff came with Nike. And so I think, and that, back to passionate learning, it's guys like Dan Wyden constantly thinking about what's going on in the world. How do I change it? How do I affect it?
Right.
And so that would have been a very enlightening story 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, because nobody thought about it like now. And now everybody's thinking about it. Mm-hmm. To what degree they're doing stuff about it, is I don't know. I mean, I know in our world, I mean, at the ICA level, it took us 2 years to reconfigure the board to get it gender balanced and more diversity and inclusion involved in it. And that, which entailed asking some old white guys like me to step down to let other people with that background come on. But it was a volunteer board. It in its roots is a volunteer board. So in an organization, mm-hmm. It's not as easy to do that. And on top of that, the talent that are in the diverse and inclusive and BIPOC community, that is, everybody wants the talent. So they're hard to find. They're because the system hasn't been training them yet, and they haven't come to the industry because they felt left, it's coming. So it's more challenging, and you got to make very tough. We're in the middle of making a great decision, but I asked the guys the other day, 10 years ago, we wouldn't have made it. But now we're saying we're going to have to make it because we've got to be more diverse, which means we're going to have to train this person, and they're not a senior, but that's the only way we're going to get from A to B. So we've got to do that. So it's so I think that's the value that's coming out of the process, which means, you know, maybe 5 to hopefully less, but potentially 5 years from now, the industry will have changed itself into like our board, and will be so much smarter and so much real and so much better work and so much more relevant to a broader swath of population. I see it on the board of the ICA every day. So, I mean, I know what the results will be. It just takes a little longer in a commercial context.
How are you seeing the industry reach out to these underrepresented communities? I mean, it can be hard to push your application through that process, right? A lot of times people get jobs because you know somebody. But if you don't know somebody, how are you getting in there in the first place?
Well, I mean, the industry has always had a problem long before all this issue, which is it doesn't pay very well to start. And it's not seen as the biggest career on the planet if you have to compare it to being a lawyer or doctor.
Right.
I mean, years ago, there was a study done that I think it was in the US that advertising as a career was seen just above selling shoes as a valuable asset to the world at large. So at first we have to reach out to the broad community in terms of, you know, that there's a great career here. It's very stimulating. There's a lot to learn. And at the same time, we got to do what I just said. Dan Wyden did at Wyden Kennedy, make it inclusive and open. And so a lot of work's being done by the ICA to reach out to broader communities, to younger people across this, and our conversations like this and our BIPOC strategy will help do all that. Mm-hmm. But it's going to take time. But I mean, I can honestly say that the conversations that I've had with leadership across North America, everybody's working on it. Or if they're not, they don't tell you. Which
they answer the question, but not. We're getting.
Well, it means that they don't know how. It's not that they don't want to. I mean, it's top of the conversation.
I find that people they don't seem to have a very definite answer to this question, which I find very interesting. Okay. What is Canadian identity?
The answer to the Canadian identity is the search of the Canadian identity.
That is a fantastic answer. And why do you feel like we are kind of still defining that in 2022?
If you go right back to the roots of Canada and compare it in a certain context to the US. Somebody once said to me, so in the US, when they wanted to, you know, conquer other parts of the country, they said, okay, here's a wagon train, here's some guns, here's some horses, have at her. Mm-hmm. And in Canada, the Hudson Bay people built forts and say, okay, go on out there, the Cour d'Ivoire, go out there, we've got a fort for you, we're going to protect you. So it's very socialistic, protective. Our healthcare system emanates from all of that. So I just think that we are we're a very forgiving, there's so many transgressions in Canadian history, notwithstanding all that. I think the problem is that we're just very nice people and don't want to offend anybody, because if you want to make change, you got to, without question, someone's going to get pissed. Mm-hmm. And Canadians culturally, with the exception of Quebec, where I'm from, have been very hesitant to rock the apple cart, to rock things a bit, to challenge things.
Yeah.
And the classic is what's happening with Ottawa with the truckers. Oh my God, we got these people. Oh my God, they're offending people. Oh my God, they're stealing food from people who need food. Oh my God, they're honking 24/7. What are we going to? Oh, well, they're allowed to protest. So the whole notion of a democracy saying, well, we've elected these officials to help us live a better life. And 1,000 guys with trucks can, it's ridiculous. Whereas in the US, National Guard would have been there about a week ago and everything would have been confiscated and there would have been a big mess, but it would have been seen as, well, that's how America deals with it and they'll be done. I don't know I don't know what happened in Germany or France, but probably similar. People just don't put up with that, and we're sort of more forgiving. So I think that's part of our identity, and now we're struggling with all of the Indigenous issues, as you know. Oh my, that was part of our history. That can't be part of our. Oh my God, how could that be?
People are shocked.
That couldn't have happened to them. No, you know what I mean. So it's, as opposed to saying, well, it did, and what can we learn from it? They're spending the first bit saying, oh, no, can't. That's not possible. We're Canadian. Well, guess what? Right. So I think that's my way of answering that question.
And do you think part of that is because we're still part of the Commonwealth? I mean, Americans, like, you're an American. You get up, you go to school, you say the Pledge of Allegiance, you have that pride. And I feel like in a way, we don't have that independent kind of thing, or?
Well, we also live beside an elephant, right?
True.
and which gives us this massive inferiority complex. I mean, look at the whole conversation between Canada and US women's hockey. Oh my God. Right. So I think I think it's being part of the Commonwealth and not knowing anymore what the Commonwealth really stands for, living next to an America, and all of its good and bad, and now even its weirdness, goes into, giving everybody a bit of an inferiority complex. I remember sitting in a restaurant in Toronto with Cheryl. We were having dinner at a really nice Peruvian restaurant, and a couple came in and sat beside us, and it turns out that it was just before Trump got elected, and she was a neurosurgeon and he was head of ER at a hospital in Connecticut, and they were coming to Toronto to see whether or not what it would be like to live here, because they couldn't live anymore in what they thought was going to be America under a Trump world.
Wow.
And so there's, intelligent, bright people. So I think all of that leads into people going, oh, let's not rock the apple cart. We're a little country really spread across a massive continent. We say to Russia, we're going to defend you. We're going to help Ukraine. Russia goes, yeah, big deal. Like, give me a break. So who cares? So, and we don't have a charismatic leadership at any level of government anywhere. Well, there's no women to start with. There's not a woman leader at any level of government. There may be a mayor or two somewhere, but there's none provincially, none federally, which is insane.
Yeah.
Like beyond insane. It's ridiculous. Anyway.
Well, and part of it too is, like the United States still has a bit of the North and South, right? Like there's definitely a divide there. But Canada, I find, has very interesting divides. There's Toronto West, Toronto East, Quebec, everybody else. Alberta kind of wants to get away from everybody. So in a way, there's divides within divides. Like there's always going to probably be some kind of political division. Everybody's going to have different opinions when it comes to stuff like that, but that all feeds into this bigger divide. Is it possible to have Canada be a full connected country?
I don't think that's possible in any country. I think given the and given that Canadians, it's not like the US where it's a melting pot. It's more of what they call a mosaic, where we thrive on diversity. I mean, we did some work for Toronto tourism, and I was shocked to find out that I think it was 60%, that was only a year or so ago, 60% of people who live in Toronto were not born in Canada.
Wow.
Toronto is the largest Italian community outside of Rome.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I had no idea.
So that's sort of huge. Our Chinese community is one of the largest in North America.
Mhm.
You know, that, I mean, when Italy plays in the World Cup and you go into the Italian section of Toronto, it's like crazy. So I think that lends to all sorts of, I mean, that makes it fun and interesting, and you know, you get to see other cultures, but it also creates a degree of diversity, and it's hard to get the unanimity of thought, right? And that may well be why there's no, I mean, the systems are all broke in a democratic society because it's not attracting the talent that it should be, right?
Right. So I'm just going to kind of bring it back a little bit to the ICA as we're wrapping up our hour here. So with the pillars being amplify, protect, and transform, what is it that makes those unique for something like the ICA?
I don't know if it's unique. I mean, it's again, it goes, well, it kind of comes back to what we just said. I mean, the Canadian advertising community is only reflective of Canada and all of the issues. So protect means that 80 to 90% of the revenue in the business is still driven by multinational brands and multinational agencies who work with companies who don't see Canada as, particularly American companies, see Canadians more similar to them than different. So why do we need to do different stuff? And that in many cases even includes Quebec, which is stunning to me, but So protecting that and making people understand that we are different, we think differently, we have different values. Transforming it means bringing it up to speed against, you know, relative to what's out there. I mean, particularly in the European markets where, you know, agencies, or I don't know if you know an agency called Droga5. You know Droga5?
I've heard of them.
Okay, Droga5 was bought by Accenture about 3 years ago for, I don't know, $1.5 billion. And I don't know who this is, but I'm going to say, can't call. And David Droga is brilliant, but what made him brilliant was he created a consultancy. So he looked at business problems and then used the agency's talent pool to do that. So we need to transform like that. And so transforming our industry into one that's got more value, builds more commercial value for our clients. And then and then amplify. I mean, again, it's the last thing Canadians do is brag. Right. And so what that's all about is essentially saying, look, we're doing some pretty good global work that is being recognized around the world. And you global brands should look at the talent in Canada and what this talent can produce, because we can do work. I mean, we work on US brands and we work on global brands. A lot of our work doesn't even air in Canada. So amplifying that and sort of is key to building the business and the industry, so that, you know, we, instead of us just taking campaigns and ideas from other markets and just running them in the marketplace, is really making them understand that you got to be relevant to the Canadian psyche, which is complex, as we discussed, that our work is great and is globally great, and that we're transforming the business constantly to meet the ever evolving challenges of what we talked about at the beginning.
And my last question, or second to last question, would be, What do you feel is the state of the health of the ICA right now?
Oh, I think it's awesome. At the annual meeting, I mean, we've got our memberships up.
Mm-hmm.
Our value to the industry is undeniable now. And while I would argue that certainly what Scott and the team and Leah did through the pandemic certainly gave it profile, the kinds of things that Scott and Leah have been able to provide to the agency membership gives, in my opinion, members of the ICA competitive advantage to those that aren't, both in terms of access to content and learning and training and thinking and business acumen. So yeah, I mean, the ICA it's huge.
Is there anything that you would like to add that I didn't ask, or anything else that you'd like to expand on?
I would only say that with all of the evolution of the technology platforms,
Mm-hmm.
and what the recognition is, and I'll say this. Let me put this. There was an incredible discussion around Facebook and what drives their algorithms, and it turns out, not surprisingly, that what drives people's viewership of content is negative stories. People don't spend time on positive stories.
Right.
So algorithms that understand that only feed you negative shit. And I think that that's kind of sad. And I think that we need to remember that at its core, advertising is still an art and a craft. And ideas that bring positive views that can change people's points of view on things about brands and society and hospitals and charities, or whatever the issues are, is something we shouldn't forget, because otherwise we can easily be commoditized by those platforms with their algorithms. And algorithms can't be purely creative. In other words, creating something out of nothing. They got to use something to create their algorithms. Mm-hmm. And for us to be valuable, I think we got to go back to the roots of the industry in the first place, which was art and craft.
And that's a wrap. Be sure to get in on the conversation. If you have any hot topics of discussion, we would love to hear from you. Until next time, continue to amplify, protect, and transform.